Hi, it's Elizabeth Willetts here from Investing in Women. Hope you are all okay. It's a rainy Tuesday here. So thank you so much for joining us because we are back for our Facebook and LinkedIn lives. If you could let us know if you can hear us all okay, give us a like or an emoji, that would be fab. Any problems with the sound, just give us a shout. But today I'm going to be chatting with Tom Stenner-Evans, who's a partner with Thrive Law. And we're going to be talking all about how flexible working has changed since the COVID pandemic and what you can expect as a job seeker when looking for work and also as an employer as well. So thank you so much for everyone that is joining us today. If you let us know if you can hear us all okay, that'd be fab. Any questions for Tom as we're chatting, please pop them in the comments and we will try to get them answered. But thank you so much, Tom, for joining us today. It's so nice to see you again and see you looking so well. So thank you. Yes, so today is a really interesting topic and quite topical. I'm going to be talking about flexible working since the COVID pandemic and what people can expect. So have you noticed a shift in terms of employer and employee expectations regarding flexible working?
Yeah, definitely, Liz. And first, thank you for having me again. I think this is the third or fourth one we've done now, isn't it? So it's nice to catch up. It's an interesting topic. It was an interesting topic pre-pandemic. I think that's just become more of the case now that the working landscape has shifted so dramatically towards sort of home working, hybrid working. So to answer your question, the expectations I think are completely different to where they were a few years ago. You only have to go back to how we all used to work, where it was quite unusual to have a day working from home unless perhaps you were unwell or you had childcare. And now it's really very much the norm, and that's pretty much ingrained in people's expectations that when they're looking for new roles, they're not just casting their net locally, they're looking much further afield, looking for things, asking right from the outset, to what extent can this role be done flexibly or even fully remotely, which is not a question anyone would have dreamed of asking in a professional space, 3 or 4 years ago. So employees are very much, from what we're seeing, putting this at the top of their list of expectations is at least some element of flexibility. I think employers had their hand forced for the last couple of years to offer full-time home working, fully remote working. And there are some who have embraced that, who've seen the value of it, seen what it means in terms of their ability to recruit quality talent. But we are seeing a bit of a shift, almost sort of nudging their way back towards a more hybrid approach. I do think, particularly in some perhaps more traditional sectors, there's a comfort in doing it the way they've always done.
Yeah.
And having an element of presence in the office is still seen as a good thing. And, in some organizations, there is value to that in terms of the ability to learn through osmosis from people, to interact with teammates from a sort of social and a professional angle. So I definitely think as the pandemic is drawing towards its latter stages, that people's expectations, employer and employee, has definitely shifted. Would you agree?
I agree.
Are you seeing that?
Employers that are steering that back to the office, or do you think, in your opinion, do you think employees want to return as well, or who's driving that return back to the office?
I think dangerous to pigeonhole them as just two groups, isn't it, really? I think individuals are all wired differently. Some people are really craving that social interaction in a workplace, the ability to sort of bounce things off one another. A lot of people use their commute as downtime to be able to unwind from the day, and some people have really struggled with that. You finish work at, say, 5 o'clock, and by 2 minutes past 5, you're on parent mode, or housekeeping mode, or cleaning mode, or who knows what. And that lack of distance between personal life and professional life hasn't been particularly well received by everyone. Mm-hmm. So I think there are employees who are very, very keen to get back in the office. I would say there aren't many employers who are still really sort of pushing fully remote work. I think employers on balance, are keener than employees to get people back to do some FaceTime. And like I said, there could be some genuine business-related reasons for that, for sort of quality of work, for social interaction, for sort of team building, etc. But I would say that it's a fair comment that there are some employers out there for whom it's a trust thing. They haven't quite got to the stage of being able to fully trust their employees to deliver from wherever, and that element of oversight, of control, perhaps gives them some comfort. So there are positive spins and negative spins on it so far.
Yeah, I think, like you said, dangerous for me actually to pigeonhole them as two groups, because there's such huge variance within those groups, and some employees, like you say, are raring to go back, have that social interaction, whereas others, working from home suits them, it suits their lifestyle, it suits what's happening in their wider life. So yeah, really good point. So do you think hybrid working is now the new norm? Is that here to stay? Or do you think there will be a shift back to full-time office work?
I think some element of hybrid working is going to become standard practice going forward. I mean, there are some sectors, hospitality and retail, just to name a couple, where that's obviously impossible because you have to be there. You can't serve someone their lunch remotely. That just doesn't work. But I think if we're talking about office-based roles predominantly, yes, I think people are starting to realize that an element of flexibility is best for everyone. In a lot of jobs, you can track productivity through various KPIs and metrics. You can also track staff satisfaction through surveys. I would expect that people are likely to find out what works best for their organization, but I'd be surprised if there are many people who are saying, no, you've got to be back in the office full time, because you're closing yourself off to good opportunities for talent, particularly female staff, working mums who will still bear most of the childcare. Also, I suppose for working dads, because that's going to inhibit things at home as well. But also people who have certain niche skills can work for organizations which are perhaps further away. So I think people understand that there's a real value to that. So I would be surprised to see us revert back to how things were, which was you work from the office as a standard unless it's sort of exceptional.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the case? Are you seeing people?
I think so. And I think that employers that are only offering full-time 5 days a week are really struggling to recruit. And, not just me as a flexible working recruiter, but speaking to other recruiters that just recruit generally, they really struggle now to hire for those roles. So, I think candidates are, at least wanting the option of being able to work flexibly and work from home part of the week. For those office-based roles where they can. I wonder what you think from a legal perspective about these certain employers that are sort of threatening to pay people less that work fully remotely.
Yeah, that was something I was going to bring up at some point, actually. So one of the top law firms in the country proposed this. They said you can work from anywhere, from home full time, but you have to take a 20% pay cut.
Yeah.
Now, that was generally pretty badly received, because I suppose the inference is if you're working from home, you might be 20% less productive, is one. Or the other one, which I didn't think really sat very well, was that, well, you're not having to pay to live and travel in London, so we want to save that money, not you. And I didn't think that was particularly a good look. I think if you're saying to someone, this is what we need you to produce or to generate, in this case, chargeable hours and fees, then that should be enough. If that person's doing their job effectively, making you the amount of money that you need them to make for you in sales or anything else, services provided, why do you need to scrape back 20% because they've saved it? I just thought that to me gave off an impression that ultimately that they're looking at themselves first. I would prefer an approach that says, like if you want to work full time from home, as long as you meet your expectations, then if you want to relocate somewhere cheaper to have a nicer house and, you know, to be nearer some other school options, great. So long as it works for everyone, it works for everyone. But I think if you get it too one-sided, that's a good example of how this can backfire from a sort of cultural perspective. So that's perhaps not the approach that I would have gone with.
Actually, with the cost of living crisis, do you think moving forward it will make those jobs even more attractive? It depends on, you know, what happens, where people have to commute, you know, talking about the hospitality staff that are having to pay to go into work every day. You know, if energy, we're going to talk a bit about cost of living crisis, but it does sort of create a little bit of a two-tier or two sort of system workforce where there's certain, you know, groups of employees that have to go into work every day. And I wonder if it would eventually, you know, that is a consideration. Are those roles more or less attractive?
It's difficult, isn't it? And I mean, traditionally, a lot of those are the lower paid jobs as well. Yeah. I think, you know, and certainly don't want to make this in any way political, but it is a challenge, isn't it, when you've got people working on frontline roles, you know, in the NHS, in hospitality and care, who have to be there, having to bear the costs of sort of fuel costs and things like that. That's really challenging.
Yeah.
I suppose the flip side to that with the energy crisis is that the appeal of working from home suddenly, you have to factor that in as well, don't you? I was doing a bit of research this morning on this actually, and it's quite hard to quantify, but they seem to be saying for a sort of, you know, average normal size semi-detached house, working from home full time could cost you sort of 40, 50 pounds, slightly more per month extra in utilities.
Yeah.
So there's another, you know, 500, 600, £700 a year, which you probably can't claim back. But then you've got to balance that and say, well, yes, but the cost of petrol and diesel has rocketed as well, and you're not paying to have to commute. So I suppose people can do their own calculations and say, well, actually, it's still better for me to work from home with the time I save and the fuel costs, even if there's an increased cost in utilities. But it's just not a great situation to be in generally, is it really? When it's expensive to get to work, or it's expensive to stay at home and work.
I know, we were going to talk about that. So I think people will be making their own calculations with, you know, cost of energy. Is it, you know, if you're thinking like that, is it cheaper to now suddenly go to the office, or is it cheaper to work from home? And I suppose that would depend on each individual.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the advice that I would give is to, you know, to be flexible enough to treat situations on an individual basis. If you live 300 yards from work and you can walk in, you probably don't want to be at home all day racking up electricity and gas costs. If you're 30 minutes away or 40 minutes away or further in the car or on public transport, you might want to. Mm-hmm. So some of the clients that I've been working with are introducing really quite flexible hybrid working policies where there's, I suppose, a range of levels, and you can spend up to X amount of time in the office or up to X amount of time at home, but it's not the sort of slightly arbitrary 3-2 split or 4-1 split. It's more based around needs of the business and then what works for you. And to me, what that does is it just builds trust in the relationship. It's a very good way to incentivize people to remain in your organization or to recruit them that isn't going to cost you a lot of money. You can help people to create a working balance around their own life, around their own challenges, around their own commitments. And I think that is something which people are valuing a lot more now than they were, let's say, 2 or 3 years ago, when you could say, we'll pay you an extra X thousand pounds more than your current employer. And it was basically swapping one office for another. But now there is an opportunity, isn't there, to say that here's the extent that we can be flexible. Here's what we can do to accommodate your specific circumstances, your caring responsibilities, your lifestyle, your children, which is a very good way, I think, to attract and retain talent at a largely negligible cost increase.
Yeah, I saw something as well. This is one that related to flexible working. I think it was John Lewis that were offering free meals to their employees to help with the cost of living crisis and things like that is good PR, because it just, you know, I think
make a huge difference.
The organisation cares about their employees, and if they can afford to do that, then, you know, they absolutely should. Talking about people as well that are working from home and that maybe made a lifestyle shift during the pandemic and relocated quite far away from the office. Now the offices are going back. What are their legal rights to continuing to work from home?
Well, so it will depend on the contract and the policies that are put in place. Now, I mean, you would expect that if you have been allowed to relocate, that would have been on the basis of a permanent change to your place of work, to a home worker, which would have either come about through the employee making that flexible working request, which we could talk about how that works in practice, or by the employer saying you can all go and work anywhere. So, for example, if you look at Deloitte, they have a policy where you can work anywhere, and essentially that means if you want to relocate from London to Leeds or further north or further west or who knows, then you can, because their policy, which I would imagine is essentially a contractual change, says we're happy for you to work anywhere. Now, I suspect there are some qualifications around things like client visits if that's necessary, but that would amount to a change in your T's and C's. Now, what that means is the employer can't then just say, well, that was great while it was fashionable, but we've had the value of that PR stunt, so now you've all got to come back to the office in the city or wherever. I'm being slightly facetious, but you get the point. So people should feel reasonably protected if that's what's been agreed. Now, if that was just a temporary thing, and it was always the expectation that there would be an element of office working as well, and someone has just chosen to relocate and take their chances, well, I mean, that's a different situation, isn't it? If the employer has always made it clear that at some stage in the pandemic you will be expected to either work in the office full time or hybrid working, then someone who has relocated themselves will have to find a way to make that work. I'm not aware of many people who have done that. Most of the people I know who have fully relocated have done so because their employer has said, yes, that's fine. As long as you agree to come into the office once a month or something like that, then that is fine for you to live wherever you like. And I've got a client actually who was looking to expand their legal team with a very niche hire, and they really struggled to find someone until they actually found a real specialist. But one of his requirements was, I need to be able to live and work remotely and just come in once every few weeks. And that has worked perfectly. And his place of work is predominantly his home as a result. But that's worked fantastically for both parties. Brilliant. So it's definitely a positive opportunity, I would say.
So that actually moves on quite nicely to our next question. So if you are job seeking and you want flexible work, what do you think you can expect speaking to people now?
I might put that question back on you in a minute, actually, as the flexible recruitment expert. But so flexible work is not a day one right, not yet. There is a consultation underway to have it so that from day one you can say, okay, I would like this job to be a flexible job. I would like to do 2 days a week from home. As it currently stands, you need 6 months continuous employment to be able to make that application, which technically means that if you're looking for flexibility, you aren't entitled to ask for it legally. But that doesn't mean that it's not a sensible conversation to have. And if you see a job that is appealing, that says office space or that isn't clear, you lose nothing by asking the question. To say, for example, look, I live an hour and a half away, or I have childcare commitments, or I have care commitments, for example. So I'm really interested in the job. Would you consider an element of flexibility to it? The interesting thing being that although you're not entitled to ask for flexible working for the first 6 months, there's definitely an argument that a refusal to consider, obviously, a part-time role, a job share, some flexibility could certainly create an indirect sex discrimination claim if it was a female applicant, because obviously it's still predominantly women who need flexibility more than men as the primary child caregivers. So the advice to employees would be just ask the question. If you think you're a good candidate, ask the question. And if they're a forward-thinking employer, you would hope they'd be open-minded to that. From the employer's perspective, you just flip that on its head. I'd say you are limiting yourself to your talent pool if you are operating how you were operating 3 or 4 years ago. And you will be a step behind your competitors, who most likely are embracing some element of flexibility. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And I would say as well, often, I get roles and they might even put a location, but actually when you push back and you say, oh, can this role be hybrid? Oh yeah, that's fine. We only come in once or twice a week. And, depending upon the role and maybe how long they've been recruiting for and the talent they're looking for that role, they can be more flexible. If they've got a perfect candidate that they know is going to be absolutely right for that role, and that individual might only be able to come in once, twice a month, then, in many circumstances, they would consider that candidate. So I think if you are job seeking at the moment and you see a role that you like, even if it doesn't mention flexible working in the advert, roles and employers are often more flexible than perhaps they initially let on.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of, like we said, hybrid working that's sort of becoming the norm that might not be put in job adverts. So
one thing I would certainly say to employers, don't oversell something which is becoming the norm. So 2 days at home per week, that doesn't make you special.
Yeah.
And it looks disingenuous. If that's something that you offer, that's great, you can put it in, but don't sell yourself on that. That's kind of standard now. Yeah, okay, 3 years ago that was something great to offer. But I think employers need to be a bit more innovative, a little bit more creative in the sort of types of flexibility that they're offering if they want to really still get ahead of their competitors. Here's a question for you, Liz. So you'll recall that Liz Truss in a few weeks ago was talking about setting salaries, I think, for depending on where you lived. Is that right? I think I saw that in the news.
I think you did say that. Yeah, she did say that.
Yeah, but she dropped it pretty quickly.
Workers.
Yeah, public sector workers. If you live in, up in Hull, then it's a lower salary than Hertfordshire because of where you live. Yeah. Regardless, I think, of where the work was. Now, I didn't pay a great deal of attention to it because she dropped it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to get your view as to whether you think actually the salary should be based on where the job is, where the individual is, or neither. If it should just be like these are the expectations of the role, so the salary is X, or if the location and the associated costs should be a factor. Because if you've got London clients, like, should they be offering London salary to someone who is sat in Devon and who perhaps never has to come to work, or is it based on London expectations? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
I've recruited for lots of different, so I've recruited for organisations where they'll have paid a London weighting. I mean, this was all pre-pandemic, so when people would have had to, live pretty close to London and would have had, larger housing costs, they paid a London weighting. And when I worked in one of the big four, if we were recruiting somebody and they wanted to be based in Leeds, for example, they would have had a lower salary because, again, they paid a London weighting. But then if they had to commute to clients in London, those expenses would have been paid. I think everything's shifted so much now, hasn't it? And the workforce is global. And so and skills, depending on the skills, can be so in demand, and people spend a long time training and perfecting those. So I think personally the best thing would be just to pay for the job, but and if people had to commute to see clients or whatever, then you'd be able to expense those. But that would help, I think, with the levelling up agenda as well that the government were So
if you pay for the output, and perhaps that isn't always going to be the case, but if you're saying, I would assume, and this is, I'm slightly out over my skis here, but I would assume that the targets and expectations in the recruitment sector in London are significantly more challenging than they would be outside, just like they would be in the real estate market for estate agents, the sort of Foxtons, people like that. And it certainly is in law. You're expected to do more hours, to bill more, to charge more per hour. So I guess if you're expected to do that, it would make sense to be paying people commensurate to what you expect of them. But I think if you base it too much on where someone happens to live and what their costs are, that to me is rather artificial. I would say, here's what we expect of you. We'll pay you accordingly, and if you want to earn more, we expect more, or vice versa. We can lower the financial expectations, but you'll get a lower salary. And I think perhaps there aren't enough employers who are thinking that laterally yet. They're sort of saying, well, you live in Dorset, so we're not going to pay you a London salary, but we're going to ask you to do London levels of work. Just doesn't make any sense, does it, to me?
I think you made a really good point, actually, because that, looking back to my recruitment career, we were not actually expected to do more than in regional offices. We were all, targeted on the same.
Okay.
And when I recruited in Big Four, everyone was targeted on the same. I mean, this was all pre-pandemic, and it was based upon people having higher costs living in London, so they'd have got a London waiting. But that does perpetuate that north-south divide as well. So really interesting. Now might be a good time to reset. We've had some comments that Amy has said, if the work gets done, it shouldn't matter the location. Well, hopefully Tom will come back on. And ultimately saves money for employers in terms of energy costs, building rents. If KPIs are met, then they're not the correct employee for the role. Ali said she 100% agrees. Access to talent is easier for employers if they're open to hybrid and remote work. Tom's back on now. Hiya.
There we go. Sorry about that. I tried to click on the comments and I pressed the wrong button.
Amy said that salaries should be based upon skills, and she'd also previously said if the work gets done, it shouldn't matter location. Ultimately saves money for employers in terms of energy costs, building rents, etc. And if the KPIs are met, they're not the correct employee for the role. And that's interesting, actually, with the energy crisis happening and businesses' energy bills, weren't being capped in the same way as households. That might have an impact on actually how much office space they want to retain.
Definitely. I think employers are going to start scaling back on large grand offices at huge costs.
Yeah.
Because as well, a lot of that cost has to be passed on to your clients often. And I think people are slightly past the whole kind of sort of show of turning up at big swanky offices and, flat whites brought out to you. And I think people are just slightly more efficient with their time. I think a lot of people are doing a lot more meetings on Zoom, obviously, and things like that, Teams, and they don't need that kind of charade anymore. What they want is the service that they want, which is in an effective, personable way, but also a more time-effective way. I think it seems strange to think that people used to trek across the city for a face-to-face meeting, which 9 times you could do with a phone call or a Teams call, and people are therefore a lot more productive. And these big offices housing hundreds of thousands of people, they're incredibly expensive.
Absolutely.
People are going to scale that back.
It seems funny when you think about it. I spend hours traipsing across London for sometimes I'm there 15-20 minutes and spend about 5 times as long traveling. So we've had a question as well from Lynn on the Facebook group, and she's made a really good point about there's not a load of legislation on, particularly around good practice for flexible working. So she wonders what good practice you are seeing some of your clients doing regarding working from home, flexible working, and promoting a good employee culture.
Good question. Yeah. I would say the clients who are doing it really well are doing it with the involvement of their people. The ones who aren't doing it so well are the ones who think they know the answers and are just coming up with a hybrid working policy, for example, that says, right, there are half a dozen of us at the senior level who probably have very different challenges to most of the staff, have come up with this policy where you've got to be in the office X days per week, and this is what it means. Now, that's not necessarily going to be suitable, but it's also quite disempowering. I think one thing that employees really included and proper levels of communication, because yes, I appreciate organization, but people like to know that they've got some sort of skin in the game. And if I would say that this presents a really good opportunity to canvass opinion and say, this is what we're looking at, a hybrid working policy. What does that look like for you through a sort of staff survey? Would you like fixed days in the office? Would you like the ability to come and go as you please? Should we move to a more hot desking environment? How should we try to accommodate as many people as possible without it being to the detriment of the business? And like giving people the opportunity to have a voice through a consultation or a staff forum or something like that will mean that whatever you end up with should be, at least to some degree, in line with what people actually think they need. And of course, everyone's got different challenges. And some people might say, well, I need to come into the office for my mental health. So I don't want something which says I can only come in one day a week. I mean, sadly, like there are people whose home lives is the worst part of their life. People come to work to escape, difficult abusive relationships, things like that. So actually, like you have to factor in that everyone has their own set of circumstances, and they're probably and they're probably going to be different to the 4 or 5 people in the senior leadership team who would otherwise make this decision. Perhaps those people, it was very easy, wasn't it? And not for people with 5-bed houses and big gardens to say, oh, everyone's got to work from home. But did they sit down and think, well, what happens if our person's in a flat share and one of the flat share people works nights? How are they going to accommodate that? It's about outside of your own box and seeing the people who work for you as individuals and understanding that everyone has different circumstances and different challenges. And the clients who are doing that, it takes a lot longer, but that's proven to be really successful.
Interesting. Thank you. If anyone's got any final questions for Tom, please do pop them in the comments and we'll try and get them answered. But it's been such a fascinating conversation as always. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. If anyone has any questions regarding flexible working or maybe their own situation, where can people find you and connect with you and learn more about you and Thrive Law?
Yes, so probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. There aren't many Stenner-Evanses in the world, so you should find me pretty easily. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, as we are as a firm generally. So Thrive Law is the brainchild of Jodie Hill. She set it up about 4 years ago. We're a boutique employment law and HR firm, but we cover the full spectrum of people matters, from sort of health and well-being side of things to diversity and inclusion, to HR advisory, all the way through to the more contentious and complicated employment law stuff. Our sort of values are based around trying to get a better conversation around things like this, trying to educate employers to understand the need to create cultures in which people can thrive from a mental health perspective, etc. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter as well, but I don't do anything remotely work related on Twitter. You can also have a look at our website, thrivelaw.co, on there as well. And we'd love to hear from you.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've had a final comment from someone on Facebook. She says that she agrees with you. As you said earlier, everyone is different, but most people like to feel some level of being listened to or trusted at work. I think we've realised now what a huge compromise it was for workers to commute to offices and all work in one way. It's really challenging to try to accommodate everyone, but she thinks it's worth it from a business perspective because people will contribute better.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better, Facebook user, whoever that was.
Thank you.
Yeah, you should get rid of your anonymity. That's a great comment. I wholeheartedly agree. And I just hope as we move towards perhaps the next generation of leaders, people are going to start putting this at the forefront of it and really understanding that things have changed, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, and I said something to somebody yesterday on a podcast that I think that one of the ways to get real lasting change, cultural change within an organization is, if you want to promote flexible working, is for you to walk the walk. So if you're a senior leader in your organization, you want to have a nice culture where people are happy working for you, then you leave on time. You make a point of saying you're going to the gym. You sort of walk the walk and show how it's done.
100%. And that is something I think that we really try to do as partners at Thrive. Jodie is very open about her mental health challenges. I'm very open about the fact that I don't work Wednesdays, I work flexibly. We don't expect people to work at times that don't suit them, obviously subject to client needs. And it's all about like people actually being looked after and treated as individuals. I don't think it's rocket science personally, but I think people are still a bit reluctant to put that level of trust. But hopefully that will change.
Hopefully. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Tom. So just a reminder, it's thrivelaw.co.uk if you've got any employment questions.
Anything people related.
Or come and ask us. Yeah,
we might know the answer.
Then do get in touch. Lovely. Well, thank you so much for everybody that has watched today. Thank you so much, Tom, for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll add all the show notes and the replay on our investinginwomen.co.uk website. So if you've joined halfway through, if you've missed this, then the replay will be coming soon. But thank you so much, Tom, once again, and see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye.